Okay, this is a response to a Jordan Peterson clip I saw here on YouTube, and I'm going to link that clip in the description. And I suggest you watch it. It's not very long, so I suggest you watch it before watching the rest of this video, otherwise, you're not going to understand the context. But in that clip, basically, Peterson lays out four criteria by which we clinically diagnose an individual's behavior or habits as harmful to that individual. So these harmful behaviors or habits could be considered an addiction, right? And the example Peterson gives is alcohol, okay, an alcohol addiction. If an alcohol addiction is conflicting with your ability to fulfill the other needs or to fulfill the other things you're supposed to be doing in your life, we might call it an alcohol addiction, right? So those four criteria that Peterson gives are that the addiction conflicts with one's employment, so maybe they aren't making it to work on time because they're drunk, okay? One's lawfulness, so maybe they're breaking the law, maybe they're driving drunk because of the alcohol addiction. The addiction conflicts with one's family relationship, so maybe the family relationship is breaking down because of the addiction. Or more broadly, maybe the addiction is causing somebody to not do the things they should be doing. And again, should is kind of subjective, right? But those are the four criteria Peterson gives by which we clinically diagnose an addiction as harmful. So, to Peterson's credit, he does say that these criteria are not absolute. And that's kind of the point I'm going to zero in on here. Why are these criteria not absolute? Well, he states that these criteria, they're hallmarks of clinical judgment. Okay, well, what's clinical judgment? Clinical judgment is what the current medical community has determined to it's the way that they've determined to judge these addictions or behaviors, right? So again, the reason they're not absolute is because it's subjective. It's based on the current medical community's judgment. Now, it's also not absolute because we ultimately can't prove causation. We cannot prove that it's the drug addictions that are causing these four criteria to show up. We can only prove correlation. Okay, so to kind of explain that a little better, instead of blaming the individuals for the addiction and blaming their bad behaviors on that addiction, we could also look at the individual's environment and we could look for the catalyst of that addiction. Okay, so don't automatically assume that there's something wrong with the individual or the individual's addiction. Don't assume that the individual has an addiction simply because an addiction is appearing alongside those four criteria, right? Just simply because that addiction seems to be interfering with employment, lawfulness, or family relationships, or what you should be doing, right? Instead, ask yourself if the very nature of employment and laws and family relationships have become fundamentally incompatible with and therefore unsustainable for humanity. So, by extension, it follows that you should ask yourself if the foundation by which familial relationships are built on is sour. Ask yourself if the fundamental structure of employment opportunities is sour. Ask yourself if the fundamental foundation by which our society is built on is sour. And instead of assuming that these addictions are causing us to stray away from that, assume that we are straying away from that social conditioning because we are incompatible with it. And these addictions aren't so much causing that incompatible or causing us to stray from them, but they're coping mechanisms. Okay, we are choosing alcohol to escape a reality we are not compatible with. And when you look at it this way, it kind of flips the script on the causation. We assume that the addiction is causing us to stray from the things we should be doing, but What if we are straying from the things we should be doing because we are incompatible with those things we should be doing? And addictions are the path by which we cope with that incompatibility. Okay? In other words, it might be time that we question the very criteria by which we make clinical judgment. Okay? Now, again, as I said, I give Peterson credit here because he said that those criteria were not absolute. And ultimately, they're not absolute because, again, we cannot prove that causation, okay? So, again, don't assume that the social conditioning that we've been indoctrinated with is the only way to do things, okay? Instead, imagine that the increasing abnormal behavior, the increasing addiction, and addiction doesn't have to be alcohol. It can be alcohol, it could be other drugs, it could be porn, it could be food, it could be gambling, it could be any addiction in particular. Okay, instead of assuming that those addictions are causing us to stray from our social standards, maybe our social standards are so fucked up that we are being forced to stray away from them, and these addictions are the manner by which we do that. And beyond that, we know these addictions are on the rise. We also know that depression's on the rise, anxiety's on the rise, obesity's on the rise, okay? We're basically, perhaps I'm suggesting that the reason these things are on the rise is because the social conditioning is bunk, okay? It's not compatible with the human psyche, and we are coping by falling victim to these addictions. Okay, so the addiction is perhaps just a coping mechanism and the catalyst for, and as well as a catalyst for rejection of those unsustainable societal expectations. In other words, the addiction is perhaps a wake-up call. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe it's forcing us to think a little bit about our societal structure. And after all, again, the rates of this drug addiction, depression, anxiety, they're on the rise, okay? So no matter how much we treat individuals, failing to address the catalyst will just allow the rates to continue to skyrocket, okay? That's the thing. If we treat individuals and we don't treat the larger societal structure, then the societal structure continues to create more symptomatic individuals. So I challenge you, Jordan Peterson, to talk to Gabor Mate, because he gives my side of this picture. Okay, he doesn't necessarily blame the individuals; he blames the societal structure. I think he wrote a book called The Myth of Normal, something like that. I haven't read it, but I get the overall gist of it just based on some interviews I've seen of him. And to end with this, I will link a clip of Gabor Mate in the description as well to a longer podcast. And I want you to watch the Jordan Peterson clip and his outlook that he described in that short clip and compare it to Gabor Mate's. And I want you to tell me which one you think is right. Thanks for watching.